The grand hall of the Imperial Council sparkled with its usual golden splendor, but Commander Thomas Smith felt anything but impressed. Hidden behind his holographic alien disguise, the human spy watched the Empire's highest officials debate Earth's fate with growing concern. "Another primitive world," Admiral White announced, his tentacles waving dismissively at the holographic display of Earth. "Rich in resources, decent technology level, but nothing that could challenge us." He pointed to various military installations across the planet's surface. "Their defenses are laughable by our standards." Smith kept his expression neutral, even as his stomach churned. After 15 years of deep cover work in the Empire's fleet, he'd learned that their greatest weakness was their absolute certainty in their own superiority. They never questioned why Earth's defenses looked so simple, or why humans had spread to only a handful of nearby colonies, despite having faster-than-light technology for over 50 years. "The standard procedure, then?" asked Counselor Reed, straightening his ceremonial robes. "Show of force, demand submission, and peaceful absorption into the Empire." The council members nodded in agreement, their jeweled headpieces catching the light. Smith watched them closely, recording everything through his cybernetic eyes for transmission back to Earth. These beings ruled 10,000 worlds, commanded fleets that could shatter planets, and had never lost a war in their 1,000-year history. And they had no idea what they were about to face. "Send the ultimatum," High Counselor Black ordered. "Give them the usual speech about benefits of Imperial rule, protection from pirates, access to advanced technology, the standard package." Smith nearly laughed. The Empire still believed they were the most advanced civilization in this sector of space. They hadn't realized that their secure networks had been compromised for decades, their supposedly advanced technology studied and improved upon by human scientists working in secret. The message was sent, and the Council waited for the panic and fear they usually received in response. Instead, Earth's unified government requested a 12-hour window to consider the generous offer. "Quite polite for primitives," Admiral White noted with approval. "Usually, we get more screaming and threats at this stage." Smith knew better. He'd seen that tone before, in the history books, in recordings of human leaders, just before they launched overwhelming responses to threats against their people. The calm wasn't submission. It was focus. 6 hours later, Earth's response arrived. The Council gathered again, expecting either acceptance of their terms or possibly a futile attempt at negotiation. Instead, they got 3 sentences. "The Earth Federation acknowledges your message. We appreciate the formal notice of hostile intent. We will respond appropriately." The silence in the council chamber was deafening. No begging, no threats, no counteroffers, just acknowledgement, and that last, oddly ominous line. "What do they mean by appropriate response?" Counselor Reed asked, showing the first signs of unease. "Probably preparing some sort of defense," Admiral White said, but his tentacles were twitching nervously. "Should we launch the demonstration attack as planned?" High Counselor Black nodded slowly. "Proceed with the attack on their colony on Mars. Show them the futility of resistance." But he paused, looking troubled for the first time Smith had ever seen. "Double the fleet size. Something about this doesn't feel right." As the council members filed out, Smith transmitted one last message to Earth. They took the bait, proceeding as planned. Then he carefully made his way to his quarters, where he began processing his transfer request to a post as far from the Imperial capital as possible. He almost felt sorry for them. The Empire thought they were starting a war. They didn't understand that humans had learned, over thousands of years of conflict, that the best wars were the ones that ended before the enemy even realized they'd lost. The Empire was about to learn why humans had spread so slowly, built such basic-looking defenses, and seemed so primitive. They were about to learn that humanity hadn't been expanding. They had been preparing. The Imperial attack fleet emerged from hyperspace above Mars in perfect formation. 50 warships, each capable of destroying a small continent, moved into position around the red planet. Their target was New Hope Colony, humanity's largest settlement on Mars, home to just over 10,000 people. Admiral White watched from his flagship's bridge with satisfaction. "Begin the demonstration," he ordered. "Remember, we want survivors to spread the message. Destroy only the outer sections." The first shots lit up the Martian sky. Imperial energy weapons carved through the colony's minimal defenses like paper. The shields that protected the human settlement didn't even last 10 seconds. Walls crumbled, buildings collapsed, and fires spread through the agricultural domes. "Sir," his weapons officer called out, "I'm detecting something strange. The humans, they're not running." Admiral White moved to the observation screen. What he saw made his tentacles curl in confusion. Instead of fleeing in panic, the colonists were moving with purpose. Some were taking pictures of the attacking ships. Others were scanning the energy weapons with handheld devices. A few were even recording videos of their own buildings collapsing, documenting the damage patterns. "What are they doing?" the Admiral muttered. In all his years of conquest, he'd never seen anything like this. Where were the screams, the panic, the begging for mercy? The colony's governor stepped out into the open, ignoring the explosions around him. He looked directly at the Imperial fleet and held up a tablet. His voice came through clear on all channels. "Attack pattern analysis complete. Weapons systems cataloged. Shield frequencies recorded. Thank you for the demonstration." Then he walked calmly back inside a half-destroyed building. Admiral White felt the first stirring of real fear. "Jam their transmissions," he barked. "Nothing must leave this system." "Too late, sir," his communications officer replied, voice shaking. "They're not transmitting anything. They already sent everything." On the bridge of another ship, a junior officer discovered something that made his blood run cold. "Sir," looking at the colony structure, "these buildings, they were designed to fall this way. The whole colony. It's a testing ground." Admiral White yanked up the structural scans. The officer was right. The colony's architecture had been specifically engineered to reveal exactly how Imperial weapons affected different materials and construction methods. They hadn't just been watching their colony's destruction. They'd planned for it. "All ships, cease fire," White ordered. But the damage was done. In just 15 minutes of attack, they'd given the humans everything they needed to know about Imperial military capabilities. Back on Earth, military analysts were already processing the data from Mars. Engineers began designing countermeasures. Scientists started developing new materials. And deep in underground bunkers, weapons developers smiled as they finally had real-world data to work with. The Empire had launched this attack to show their power. Instead, they'd walked right into humanity's trap. A message arrived from Earth's government. Demonstration received and analyzed. Thank you for your cooperation. You now have 24 hours to surrender unconditionally. Admiral White laughed nervously at first. They can't be serious. We just destroyed their colony. Sir, his tactical officer interrupted. I'm looking at the casualty reports. There were 10,000 registered colonists on Mars. And we only found 50 bodies. All of them were already terminal cancer patients who volunteered for this. The Admiral's tentacles went limp. They hadn't attacked a colony. They'd attacked a stage, carefully set up to learn everything about Imperial military technology. And they'd fallen for it completely. As the fleet prepared to return to Imperial space, a young engineer made one final terrifying discovery. Every piece of debris from the colony contained microscopic robots. They were crawling over the Imperial ships, studying their construction, finding every weakness. The Empire had thought they were teaching humans a lesson about submission. Instead, humanity had taught them something far more important. Never give your enemy a free weapons test. They just didn't know how expensive that lesson would be. Not yet. The Imperial Council chamber had never been so quiet. High Counselor Black read Earth's message for the 4th time, hoping the words would somehow change. You have 24 hours to unconditionally surrender and withdraw all forces. No extensions, no negotiations. This is ridiculous. Admiral White burst out, his tentacles twisting with rage. They lost a colony. We destroyed their buildings. Their defenses were nothing against our weapons. Commander Smith stood quietly in his corner, still maintaining his alien disguise. He watched the Empire's leaders react exactly as Earth had predicted they would, with pride, anger, and complete blindness to the trap they were in. Perhaps, suggested Counselor Reed, we should show them what a real attack looks like. Not just one colony, but several. We have 5,000 ships ready to launch. The council members nodded in agreement. They began planning a massive assault, drawing up target lists and fleet movements. Only Smith noticed that the room's computer displays were flickering slightly, just for a fraction of a second, every few minutes. Above Earth, the human fleet sat motionless. Only 50 ships, all of them appearing to be simple defense vessels. The Empire's scouts reported no movement, no weapons charging, no signs of preparation for war. This only made the Imperial leaders more confident. Look at them, Admiral White said, pointing to the scouts' footage. Their ships are tiny. No planet-cracking weapons, no fleet killer bombs, not even decent shields. This will be the shortest war in Imperial history. Commander Smith finally spoke up. Sir, if I may ask, doesn't this seem strange? They know our capabilities. They saw our weapons. Why aren't they afraid? The room fell silent for a moment. Then High Counselor Black laughed. Because they're primitive. They don't understand what they're facing. Ready the fleet. We'll show them what real power looks like. Smith nodded and quietly submitted his transfer request again, this time marking it as urgent. He knew what was coming. The Empire thought Earth's small fleet was their only defense. They hadn't realized that humanity's real weapons had been in place for years. In orbit around Earth, the human ships remained still. Their crews worked calmly, monitoring screens and checking systems. There was no panic, no rushed preparations, no desperate last-minute plans. Everything had been ready for decades. Back in the council chamber, Admiral White was giving his final briefing. We'll hit them with everything. All 5,000 ships, maximum firepower. They'll surrender the moment we arrive. And if they don't? Smith asked quietly. Then we'll destroy their fleet, crack their planet's crust, and make an example of them for any other worlds thinking of resistance. The Admiral's tentacles waved dismissively. They have 6 hours left to surrender. After that, they learn why the Empire has never lost a war. As the council meeting ended, Smith made his way to the nearest transport bay. His transfer had been approved with unusual speed. Perhaps someone in the Imperial bureaucracy had sensed what was coming. As he boarded his ship, he sent one final message to Earth. They're going to attack with everything. Proceeding to safe distance as planned. The Empire spent the next 5 hours preparing the largest battle fleet ever assembled in this sector of space. 5,000 warships, each capable of destroying a continent, formed up near the Imperial capital. Admiral White stood proudly on his flagship's bridge, ready to make history. With 1 hour left until the humans' deadline, he sent them a message. Your time is running out. Surrender now or face total destruction. Earth's response was just 3 words. Check your math. The Admiral stared at the message in confusion. Check their math. What did that even mean? They had overwhelming force, superior technology, and centuries of undefeated warfare behind them. What could humans possibly understand about the mathematics of war that the Empire didn't? He was about to learn that humans had mastered a very different kind of math, the calculus of ending conflicts before they began, and their calculations were perfect. As the final hour of Earth's deadline approached, Admiral White stood proudly on his flagship's bridge. 5,000 Imperial warships filled the space around him, their weapons charged and ready. The largest fleet in Imperial history waited for his command to attack Earth. Time, he asked, his tentacles moving with anticipation. 3 minutes until their deadline expires. Sir. The Admiral smiled. Send one last message. Tell them to look out their windows and see what they're facing. Perhaps they'll be wise enough to. He never finished that sentence. Every screen on his bridge went black. The lights flickered and died. The gentle hum of the ship's engines fell silent. Around his flagship, other vessels started going dark, their lights winking out one by one like dying stars. Report, he shouted. No one answered. Every console, every computer, every piece of technology on his ship had simply stopped working. Across the Imperial fleet, the same scene repeated 5,000 times. Mighty warships, each capable of destroying worlds, turned into lifeless metal hulks floating in space. Emergency power failed. Life support systems shut down. Even backup systems remained dead. On the Imperial capital world below, chaos erupted. Banking systems crashed. Transportation networks froze. Food production facilities shut down. Defense systems went offline. The entire technological infrastructure of the Empire's most advanced world just stopped. In the Imperial Council chamber, now lit only by emergency chemical lights, High Counselor Black watched in horror as reports came in through old-fashioned radio devices. The same thing was happening everywhere. Every world, every ship, every Imperial installation across thousands of systems, all dead. A single message appeared on every working screen in Imperial space. It was text only, white letters on a black background. We warned you to check your math. You thought the deadline was about gathering your ships. We spent it differently. The past 24 hours equals time needed for our virus to reach every Imperial system through your own communication networks. Thank you for gathering your entire fleet in one place. It made things much simpler. Admiral White floated in his powerless ship, watching emergency lights blink on across his fleet. The backup systems were designed to be completely separate from main power. They were supposed to be impossible to hack. But they all came online displaying the same message. Your backup systems now run on our software. We've restored minimal life support. Don't make us turn it off. In a secure bunker on Earth, the Human Defense Council watched their screens as reports came in. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Their virus, planted in Imperial systems years ago by disguised human trading ships, had spread perfectly through the Empire's own communication networks. Send the second message, ordered the defense chief. All across Imperial space, another text appeared. For decades, you thought you were watching us. We let you see what we wanted you to see. Simple ships, basic weapons, primitive defenses. But while you were studying our weaknesses, we were learning everything about you. Your passwords, your security systems, your technology. Look around you. This is what defeat looks like. You have 1 hour to surrender. This time, we suggest you take the offer. In the Imperial Council chamber, High Counselor Black finally understood. The humans hadn't been preparing for a war. They'd been working to make sure a war would never happen. Their ships hadn't moved because they hadn't needed to. The battle was over before their deadline even expired. As he wrote out the Empire's surrender by hand on actual paper, the only working writing method left, he remembered Commander Smith's transfer request with sudden clarity. The human spy had known. He tried to warn them in his own way. The Empire had spent centuries perfecting the art of winning wars. But they had just met a species that had mastered something far more powerful, the art of ending them before they began. And now, sitting in his darkened chamber, writing out his civilization's surrender, High Counselor Black finally checked the math. The answer was simple. Humanity, 1. Empire, 0. Admiral White stared at his food tray in the emergency shelter, his tentacles curling in disgust. Like everyone else in the Imperial capital, he was now eating basic rations delivered by manual labor. All food production facilities remained shut down, and nobody dared to restart them. A young medical officer rushed into the shelter, waving a primitive microscope. "Sir, we found something in the food supply." In all of it, everything we've been eating for years. Under the microscope, tiny machines became visible. Nanites, billions of them, in every bite of food the Empire had consumed for the past decade. They had passed harmlessly through imperial bodies, seemingly doing nothing. Until now. They're receiving signals, the medical officer explained, his voice shaking. They've been dormant all this time, but now, they're active. They're in all of us. In orbit, the powerless Imperial fleet drifted helplessly. Engineers trying to restore systems made a terrifying discovery. Their mighty shields, the pride of Imperial technology, had been useless. The enemy had never planned to attack from outside. On a small outpost at the edge of Imperial space, Commander Smith finally revealed himself to the local governor. He removed his holographic disguise, showing his human face for the first time in 15 years. "We had to make you understand," Smith explained to the shocked governor. "Your empire only knows how to win wars. Humanity. We learned to end them." "But how?" the governor asked, staring at the person he'd worked with for 3 years. "How did you do all this?" Smith smiled sadly. "Your ships came to Earth 50 years ago, thinking they were undetected. We saw you. We studied you. We learned everything about your technology, your systems, your weaknesses. Then we planned. Not for a war. For peace." "Peace." The governor laughed bitterly. "You call this peace?" "Yes," Smith replied. "Because the alternative was destruction. If we fought your way, millions would die. Cities would burn. Worlds would be destroyed. Instead, we chose a better way." Across Imperial space, more discoveries were made. Human agents have been everywhere. That new maintenance worker? Human. The trading company that installed computer upgrades? Human-owned. The Food Supply Corporation, run by humans through shell companies. In the Imperial Council chamber, now lit by primitive chemical lamps, High Counselor Black received a new message. This one came by traditional paper, carried by a nervous young aide. "Your bodies contain approximately 50 billion nanites each." The message read, "They can eliminate disease, extend your lives, or end them instantly. Right now, they're keeping you healthy. We suggest maintaining good diplomatic relations to keep it that way." The council members looked at each other in horror. Their own bodies had been infiltrated years ago. Their mighty shields meant nothing. Their weapons were useless. The humans had won without firing a single shot. In his office, Commander Smith sent his final report to Earth. "They're beginning to understand. It wasn't just about technology. It was about philosophy. They saw war as a path to victory. We saw it as a failure of intelligence." The Empire's mighty fleet still drifted powerless in space. Their crews watched helplessly as small human ships finally approached. Not warships, but engineering vessels, rescue ships, medical ships. "Let me explain what happens next," Smith told the governor. "We'll restore your basic systems, medical facilities first, then food production, finally transportation, but everything will have safeguards. Think of it as mandatory peace." "You're enslaving us," the governor said. Smith shook his head. "No, we're teaching you. War isn't about who can kill the most. It's about who can make killing unnecessary. Your empire spent 1,000 years learning to win wars. Now you'll learn something far more valuable." "And what's that?" the governor asked. "How to make wars obsolete." Across the galaxy, the Empire was learning a harsh lesson. They had expected a civilization to fight them with ships and guns. Instead, they got something far more terrifying. A species that had turned peace into the ultimate weapon. The first world to surrender was Ridge Prime, a wealthy core planet of the Empire. They didn't surrender to a fleet of warships or an invading army. They surrendered to a single human wearing a business suit, carrying a tablet. "Your orbital defense platforms have been running our software for 8 years, she explained to Ridge Prime's rulers. "Your banking system exists on our servers. Your food, your water, your air, all controlled by our systems. Surrender is just accepting what's already true. They signed the surrender document in 10 minutes. Across Imperial space, the pattern repeated. Some worlds tried to fight back. On Steel Heart, the sector's biggest military production center, they attempted to launch their reserve fleet of warships. The ships rose from their hangars, weapons charged, crews ready for battle. Then every ship's artificial gravity reversed. Crews found themselves pinned to their ceilings, unable to reach any controls. Those shipyards. The human representative told Steel Heart's military council, "We built them. Through shell companies, under different names. Every ship you've constructed in the last 5 years has our systems built into their cores. Would you like us to turn the gravity back on?" They surrendered within the hour. On the Imperial throne world, High Counselor Black watched his empire crumble, not through violence or destruction, but through the simple revelation of how complete human infiltration had been. "Report," he commanded, using an old-style paper messaging system. The reports were all the same. Everywhere they looked, they found human influence. The company that supplied computer chips to their biggest weapons manufacturer. Human-owned. The corporation that maintained their communication networks, run by humans through proxies. The advanced AI that controlled their automated defense systems, designed by humans. How did we not see this? Black asked his advisory council. Commander Smith, now openly human, stood in the corner of the room. "You saw exactly what we wanted you to see. A primitive species, barely able to manage interstellar flight. You never wondered why we didn't expand faster, build bigger ships, develop stronger weapons. You thought we couldn't. The truth is, we didn't need to. Some worlds tried to resist through traditional means. The fortress world of Iron Shield activated its planetary defense system, the strongest in the sector. The governor smiled as the massive weapon platforms powered up. His smile faded as every platform turned and aimed at the planet's surface. An interesting choice, came the human message. Would you like to see what your own weapons can do to your cities? Or would you prefer to surrender? They chose surrender. A few fanatics attempted to fight with purely mechanical weapons, devices they thought couldn't be compromised. They learned that the humans had planned for this too. Their bullets contained traceable metals, manufactured in human-controlled factories. Their explosive powder had been chemically altered to lose potency after a specific time. In the Imperial Council chamber, Black received the final count. Out of 10,000 worlds, 9,000 had surrendered without any resistance once they understood the situation. 999 others had attempted some form of resistance, only to discover that their means of fighting had been compromised years or decades ago. Only one world was still holding out, the Imperial capital itself. Why? Black asked Smith. Why go to all this trouble? You could have destroyed us years ago. Smith walked to the window, looking out at the powerless city. Because that's the difference between you and us. You think victory means destroying your enemy. We think victory means making sure there never has to be a fight. A message arrived from Earth. Your empire is gone. Not burned, not destroyed, but transformed. You have 1 hour to surrender the capital world, or we can demonstrate what else those nanites in your bodies can do. Black looked at his trembling hands, imagining the billions of microscopic machines flowing through his veins, machines that had been there for years, waiting, watching. The Empire had lost its final war, not through combat, but through preparation, not through destruction, but through infiltration. They had finally met an enemy that didn't believe in fighting wars. They believed in preventing them. 1 month after the Empire's surrender, High Counselor Black sat in a new kind of council chamber. Gone were the golden decorations and elaborate thrones. Instead, a simple round table dominated the room. Around it sat former Imperial leaders and human representatives. "You're not what we expected," Black admitted, looking at the human delegation. "We thought you would execute us, destroy our cities, enslave our people." "That would be wasteful," replied John Miller, Earth's chief representative. And if there's one thing humans hate, it's waste, especially the waste of life. The terms of surrender had surprised everyone. No executions, no imprisoned leaders, no dismantled worlds. Instead, humans brought change through integration and education. In orbit, the once mighty Imperial fleet was being reactivated, but not as warships. Engineering teams were converting them into exploration vessels, research ships, and transportation craft. Your empire spent its resources building weapons, Miller explained, displaying holographic charts. We'll teach you to build tools instead. Your ships once cracked planets. Now they'll help terraform dead worlds into garden worlds. Commander Smith, now working openly as a human liaison, walked through the Imperial capital streets. Where there had once been military parades, he now saw schools being built. Former weapons factories were being converted into medical research facilities. The hardest part for them to understand, Smith wrote in his final report to Earth, wasn't our technology. It was our philosophy. They kept waiting for the punishment, the revenge, the cruelty. They couldn't grasp that preventing war was more important to us than winning them. In the new council chamber, Miller continued the integration briefing. Those nanites in your bodies, they're not just weapons. They're medical tools. They can cure diseases, repair injuries, extend your lifespans. All they needed was the right activation signal. Black touched his chest, feeling different now about the machines in his blood. And if we try to fight back, then they become weapons again, Miller said simply. But we're betting you're smart enough to choose a better path. Across the former empire, change was spreading. Humans shared their technology openly now, but with built-in safeguards. They taught the art of prevention, the science of avoiding conflict, the mathematics of peace. Some called it enslavement, others called it enlightenment. In the end, most called it survival. Here's what you never understood about humans, Smith told a group of former Imperial military officers. We don't avoid war because we're weak. We avoid it because we're strong enough to find better solutions. Your empire spent 1,000 years learning to win wars. We spent that time learning to make them unnecessary. In Earth's Central Command, the Defense Council reviewed the final statistics. Imperial worlds converted to peaceful production, 10,000. Lives lost in the transition, 0. Shots fired, 0. Planets destroyed, 0. Years of infiltration required, 50. Cost in resources compared to traditional war, 1%. The perfect war, the defense chief noted, is the one that never happens. 1 year after the surrender, High Counselor Black stood before the new Galactic Council. Humans and former Imperials sat together, planning the future of their shared space. I finally understand, Black announced. We thought we were the most advanced civilization because we could destroy anything. But you were advanced enough to take over everything without destroying anything. That's true power. Miller smiled. No, that's true civilization. And now, together, we can build something better than an empire. What's that? Black asked. A future without war. Because the best victory isn't defeating your enemy, it's turning them into allies. As the council meeting ended, Smith looked out at the stars through the chamber's window. The same stars that had once watched Imperial warships patrol with pride now saw research vessels and trading ships instead. The Empire had learned its final lesson. Humans didn't fight wars because they had discovered something far more powerful. They had mastered peace. And in the end, that was the most terrifying weapon of all.